Will you welcome with me Christina Williams to our pulpit?
Oh man, I'm gonna be bawling before I've even started. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I have already been bawling. Who am I trying to kid tonight? So, and I'm not sure which way to stand. I don't want to put my back to anybody. I love you all, just. So I'm so delighted and so honored to be here in such a wonderful, wonderful house of all that is divine. And all that is human. And all that brings those two together in such fabulous harmony and correction. Right? Man. It's funny because when people at home were asking me what I was doing this weekend, I said, well, I'm going to San Francisco and I'm going to speak. I started telling people actually a little while ago that I had this speak coming up and it was fabulous. And it took me a while to several times of reading the email to realize that there was a different S word in the email that was actually sermon. It was like, oh, fuck. And excuse me, it's all holy, right? It's all holy. So I'm so happy to be here, and I'm really, really happy to have public opportunity to honor Mary Daly. And I'm sure she's very well known to some of you and maybe less well known to others of you. And she's very much a part of my coming into myself as a woman, as a lesbian, as a spiritual being, reclaiming that part of myself. And part of my survival, really, to be totally blunt about it, And so I'm so happy to be able to honor her passing. What a fabulous being. I am going to tell you a bit about myself, which it hadn't occurred to me to do. Before my partner, Julie, the wonderful Julie, said to me, well, you're going to tell your story, aren't you? And I just went, oh, man, no. I'm British, We just really don't go on about that kind of thing, It's done, I'm fine, It's all good, right? I'm more comfortable in, rhetoric and, So I am going to tell you about myself, because she said, well, come on, honey, we're Americans, we love that shit. So. And I love it, too. Who doesn't love to be witnessed, right? Don't we all? So I did grow up in an evangelical Christian family. My father, in fact, who was a doctor in his regular life, was also a lay minister. So this is a huge full circle kind of healing for me to be in the pulpit here today, and thank you so much for allowing me to be here. I'm really kind of making peace with my DNA here. Yeah. I fell in love with a woman, not nearly as deeply as I'm in love with you, sweetheart. I was only 19, but to the degree that I was able, I truly did fall in love with a woman at the age of 19, kind of 19, 20, just as Mary Daly was helping me make my journey out of the church that I had been brought up in. I'm so happy that I had the feminist movement in the left and the lesbian movement. Really, for me, it was the feminist movement to come out into, to have some kind of cushion. Without that, I don't know where I would be. And so grateful. But as a young lesbian, not yet out to my parents, either as a non-Christian or a lesbian, and really they held equal weight, I spent hours in church pews with my parents who'd come down to see me kind of on, half terms from university or whatever. And I'd go to church because I wasn't quite willing to say, oh, no, not, So I would spend hours in church pews running a mantra through my head to deflect what I imagined was God's disapproval of me at the time. It was kind of an attempt to put up my own force field to shield me from being wounded by the messages of shame and guilt, that just seemed to be seeping into me out of the pews. The mantra was, I am a radical lesbian feminist. 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 And it was a shield for me. Yeah, it was, I don't believe what you believe. I believe what I believe. And in my world, I am okay. It was a lot of work. And that was how I protected myself early on. I don't need your dogma. And here's the catch for me. I have a new one. And I always did say, I had enough insight to say I don't want to just trade one dogma for another. I don't want to do that, I had that much insight into fundamentalism and how I'd been wounded by it. But because I didn't really know how to feel yet, how to really be fully human and connected to spirit, I did it anyway because, the neural pathways were carved. I knew how to do ideology. And so I dumped one set and filled it up with something else. And became a fundamentalist feminist, really. And it was part of my journey, I have 3 hours up here, right? Okay, just kidding, I promise I won't. But I'm getting kind of ahead of myself, actually. So what actually happened when I came out to my parents was that they freaked out. They were otherwise really reasonable people. They were smart and sensitive and pretty well developed, in terms of their own exposure to the world, and they were quite intellectual and all of that stuff. But they had a fear of going to hell. And the giving over of their power to an external authority that could send them to eternal damnation meant that they could fragment into fundamentalist fanaticism, right? So they came to Vancouver for their own little jihad. And I don't want to trivialize, what's going on, or the word jihad, or terrorism, but for me, I really did have a fear for my survival in some deep way. I didn't think they were going to kill me, but I had a fear for my survival. They came to Vancouver where I was living, and they convinced my landlord to let them into my apartment. And I came home with my best friend at about 1 a.m., We were in our early 20s, and I found them in my home, rifling through my stuff, scouring my books, and finding everything they were looking for, and reading my journal. So I ran downstairs and I screamed at my landlord, because it was easier to scream at my landlord, right, and get all that fire going and then come back up, for letting them in, and then, ousted my parents with some difficulty, but did it, and yeah. Anyway, so then after that, I decided I was leaving, and I wasn't going to tell them where I was going. I was going to leave town. And so I went to see a lawyer and a psychiatrist, and I told each of them what had happened, that I had seen my parents in this kind of state once before, and I didn't know what they were capable of, and I needed somebody to know so that there could be some record, so that there could be a tracking of me of some kind, because my father had said he wanted to put me in secure treatment. So really happily for me, the lawyer that I saw happened to be Robin Tyler's cousin. And she, as many of you obviously know, is a well-known lesbian comedian and activist. And he said to me, Christina, my cousin told me, and I'd never had this thought before, really that what is so unique and so compelling about the kind of oppression that gays and lesbians experience is that we lose our families. potentially. Now, I'm not saying that that's not true of people who experience other kinds of oppression. But that's what he said to me, and I really needed to hear it. Certainly, we know people with different kinds of disabilities and different abilities are maltreated by their families. But I was really, that was profound for me, that witnessing. So I left. I was disowned and I was disinherited. And that was the beginning of my healing journey, really. You know? I left, and I knew that I was also burned out as a feminist, that I couldn't carry this fundamentalist kind of wavelength anymore. I just couldn't do it. You know, I was so vibrating, so in my head, trying to hold everything together, you know, and had this like slot. Okay, this goes there, just sort of, you know, fitting my experience into a belief system instead of living and allowing what I knew to come forward. That I just knew that I had way too many answers and not enough questions. And I would say that to my friends. They would say, "Why on earth are you going to Calgary? There's nobody there. There's no feminists. There's no dykes. There's like no culture. It's like a stampede." And, you know, I just said, "Look, I don't know why, but my sister is there," which was big, and it feels like space. And I may be able to learn something else. So the gift was that I began to open and deepen to myself and to heal. And I needed to go inside and find my own authority, finally. So 20 or so years later, a friend of mine who lives in the UK for part of the time and in Canada for part of the time sent me a link to a Manchester Guardian article that was about the ex-gay movement and a resurgence of the ex-gay movement in response to a study that had been published by Robert Spitzer that many of you are probably familiar with. He was a psychiatrist who didn't really lead the charge, but was the last person to get it over the hurdles it needed to clear to get homosexuality removed from the DSM-3 in 1973. And then he published a study in 2001 saying that he felt that some highly motivated homosexuals could perhaps change a core aspect of our beingness and could change our sexuality. And so, of course, the right leapt on that with its familiar fervor. Here was a secular study by an atheist psychiatrist, so it really must be right and you can't refute it now. Anyway, so there was this whole resurgence, and the Manchester Guardian was covering it, and this is where I first learned about the Love and Action programs and the live-in programs for people to be reoriented and all of the stuff that everybody is so familiar with. But I hadn't really been, and I thought, oh my God, it's still happening. This is the stuff that my parents wanted to do to me, and here it is. And it's still going on. And not only that, but it's happening here in Canada, right?